All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to our first Sacramento City Unified School District Black Pearl School Board Town Hall meeting. We are very excited to have the opportunity to engage with you all this evening. This has been a long time coming, and we're very excited to be partnering to discuss this agreement that has been reached between the Black Pearl School Board and the Sacramento City Unified School District in regards to ongoing systemic issues of racism, particularly for our African American students and our students with disabilities. This compromise and release agreement has been the work of many individuals, and one of the short-term measures here that is bringing us together is this town hall. In this town hall, we're going to kind of review the outcomes of the agreement, the measures that are going to take place under the agreement, including the role of what is known as an independent monitor. I'll be happy to share who the groups have identified as our independent monitor, and then what's known as an action plan, which will be the development of a plan by our independent monitor after there's been some time to review some data, ask questions, meet with both parties, and develop in collaboration an action plan that will address the numerous findings and areas of focus within this agreement. The way that our town hall is going to work this evening is that we've collaborated around a joint presentation. Mr. Daryl White will be presenting first on a bit of background and information as to who the Black Pearl School Board is, some of the issues that kind of initiated the conversations and the eventual difficult decision to file suit against the district, as well as what were some of the short-term measures that came as a result of that initial lawsuit. And then I will be stepping in to speak a bit about more of the specifics around what is in the compromise and release agreement, and to specifically talk about what some of those specific measures are. There are numerous, there are 22 measures in total. Talk a bit about our independent monitor, who we've selected, and then discuss some next steps. This is our first town hall. We've gone with a virtual fashion for this evening, and we're hoping to learn a lot from this process, as we will be also having an in-person town hall next week at Hiram Johnson High School. So with that, I will turn it over and ask some of our other members to introduce themselves before I go into some of our interpretation services that are available this evening. Mr. White?
Yeah, my name is Daryl White. I'm chair of the Black Pearl School Board, and I am part of this joint presentation tonight.
Perfect. Thank you very much, sir. Mr. Pinkston, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Carl Pinkston, Black Pearl School Board. I will be monitoring the question and answer today.
Perfect. Thank you, sir. Alex, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Alex Santa Ana. I'm an attorney with Equal Justice Society, representing Black Pearl School Board.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And I noticed that our Chief Academic Officer, Yvonne Wright, was able to join us this evening. Very thankful for that. And unfortunately, I know that she is out ill, but Ms. Wright, if you'd like to introduce yourself, I think it would be greatly appreciated.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Yvonne Wright. I'm Chief Academic Officer, and I'm happy to be with you this evening.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And we're also joined by our Chief Communications Officer, Brian Heap.
Hello, everyone. My name is Brian Heap. I serve as the Chief Communications Officer for Sac City Unified, and we are here to just be supportive and to help get questions answered, and also to maybe bring up any relevant documents that are mentioned throughout the program.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Brian. Okay. With that, I do want to mention that we do have interpretation available should you need it. We have multiple interpreters in our 5 main languages. And so if you notice at the bottom of your screen, there should be an interpretation button that should allow you to identify a particular language if you should need it, and that will take you to a room where the interpretation is going to be available in real time. Okay, unless there are any specific questions before we get started, what I will do is share my screen, and then I will turn it over to Mr. White to begin our presentation.
And Gino, I'll just wave to you for the next slide.
Perfect. It's all yours, sir.
Thank you. Again, I'd like to welcome you to this town hall. It's an opportunity for you to kind of figure out what's been happening for the last several years. We've been in this process since the latter part of 2018, almost 4 years ago. And so we're at a point now that we can actually bring you in to our discussions to gain some insights as to what's happened. Obviously, you can see the slide. It's about special education. And our expectations for this meeting today is to discuss the historical context of Black Parallel School Board versus the Sacramento City Unified School District in terms of the lawsuit itself. I want to talk about what the settlement actually means to the students in Sac City. And hopefully we can get to what are the must-dos that the district has to move forward on. And then finally, how you, the parents, can participate moving forward. Who are you going to call when there are issues that arise that may be connected to the settlement? We want to make sure that you have the right numbers, the right people, so that you can kind of move your personal agendas forward. Questions. We're sure you're going to have a whole lot of questions, and they're going to pile up throughout this presentation. And if they do, we're going to allow you a process. We want you to feel free to ask questions throughout the presentation. We have provided for your use the question and answer feature, which so that you can pose your question for G or I. And we have people who are monitoring this feature, and they will kind of categorize and bring those questions to the panelists, Gio and I, so that we can make sure that we get to them in real time. So, to kick it off, Black Parallel School Board and the Sacramento City Unified School District have come to an agreement. It has been reached. And we are going to provide for you what that actually looks like. But first, I want to talk just a little bit about the historical nature of this agreement. Firstly, everyone always wants to know, what is a Black Parallel School Board? If you can see in front of you, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 people who are the board. We are the executive officers of this board. We have, I think, close to 1,000 participants who have been sworn in to participate as part of our community. And so we have grown, and we've been around, I guess, since 2007, if I remember correctly. Our involvement actually started with a report completed by the Council of Great City Schools. And if you don't know who the Council of the Great City Schools are, it's a collaborative among 78 of the largest urban school system. Each of these districts participate as a consortium to kind of look at how to provide better services to students, how to analyze what's going on in their own programs, and to just kind of help each other. Well, the Council of Great City Schools was asked by Sacramento City Unified School District to take a look at the special ed program because they had some concerns themselves. And this is the report that they completed. And there were about 40-something areas that they wanted improved as far as special education was concerned. It came out in 2017. The problem with this report was that it sat on the shelves a little bit longer than the community could tolerate. And so we started getting phone calls from parents, and we wondered what the heck was going on. Typically, we had not been involved really in special ed systems, but we were kind of, being told by parents we need to be. And so as a catalyst to get started, we decided to have a listening session. And we brought about 35 to 50 parents in our offices and just sat there and listened to the kinds of concerns that they had. By the end of their testimony, everybody was crying because we could not believe that the level of service was not at a level that would promote the academic, social, and personal success of students who had IEPs. And so when you have parents who are frustrated, it typically always leads to lawsuits. And that was a really, really interesting situation for our organization. We had never filed a lawsuit against anybody for anything. And we were almost left with this as an only choice. Back it up one more time, Jill, for me. And when it became something that as part of a discussion for the organization, we really had a difficult time kind of moving forward. So we decided to just talk about it inside the organization. And the more we talked about it, the more we could see the frustration that parents had, the more we came to the conclusion that we needed to move the agenda as quickly as possible. And we decided that lawsuit was the only way to do that. Now, we had a good, strong relationship with the district, and we knew that to move forward with a lawsuit is going to ruffle a whole lot of feathers. And we filed it, and it in fact did ruffle a whole lot of feathers. And we've been working since to try to smooth them over. And I think we probably at this point have done a very, very good job. So what were those complaints specifically? The first one, did you skip one on Jill? Just back it up one slide.
Yeah.
Okay, there it is. Fewer non-existent site-based interventions, meaning that once we had a student had an IEP, and those participants in that IEP had an idea of what was necessary, or they didn't know what was necessary and didn't know how to locate other resources or interventions that would put the student on the straight and narrow and allow them to be much more successful. So we were more discipline-minded than intervention-minded. So that was a big, big complaint. The lack of consistency across the district, meaning some schools you could go to and IEPs were moving along really, really well. Things were getting done. Kids were moving forward. But in others, it was just a lockdown. It was not something that was very smooth, a smooth operation for many parents. And it just led to multiple levels of frustration. And then we had no idea of measuring whether or not students were growing in special ed. There's a whole lot of information out there that people go by that says simply, once you're in special ed, we're not sure to what extent you're going to grow. And so parents wanted to know how well their kids were doing if they had IEPs, because their understanding was an IEP was supposed to make things better. And so they wanted to, on a consistent basis, see whether or not things were getting better for their kids. And in particular, when we're saying, oh, you jumped another slide. You probably want to use a click mechanism, Jill, because if you use a roller, it jumps slides.
Yeah.
I think you have to go back one more time. Okay. When it comes to special ed referrals, we found out from listening to parents that the timeframes were really inconsistent. Timelines weren't being followed. There just didn't seem to be correspondence between being getting a referral in and the actual testing taking place within the timeframes laid out by law. We found out in some cases that referrals were simply being denied without notification. Parents sitting around waiting for services for their kid, and the referral had been denied, and the parent was never found out. Other issues parents had, timelines being changed, or simply timelines missed. And when you have timelines, processes laid out by law, the expectation on the side of parents is that they be followed. We also discovered that knowledge among principals varied across the district as it related to special education referrals. There were staff inconsistencies and knowing when to utilize interventions rather than the referral. In many cases, the intervention was a referral. Let's move the student somewhere else. And that mindset kind of permeated the processes that really frustrated parents. Interventions, as parents understood it, was what are we going to do to make this work? And we just simply too often couldn't get to that stage. The other is informational. Is that parents were complaining that they've heard of 504s, but schools won't let them have them. For an example, a parent would say, well, I know my kid needs services. Well, the kid's tested and doesn't qualify, but nobody admits to the parent that there is another option. And the 504 plan is that option, which allows parents then to go in and get some services for their kid that go beyond what kids in the traditional program get. There he goes. Other parent complaints, when parents were in meetings, they looked over to see the IEP itself, and they don't remember having had anything to do. It seems that was already filled out prior to their involvement in the meeting. And so to that extent, they, just determined they were rights were just simply ignored. Before the meeting, during the meeting, because they would ask questions, and staff would sometimes just try to push them along. And after the meeting was over, everybody has something they have to do, and they're up and they're gone. And the parents sitting there still scratching their head. Third thing about IEP meetings, inconsistent administrative involvement. Sometimes the principal was there, sometimes the principal wasn't. And sometimes the principal may be there, but wasn't very effective in supporting the child. And was more in line with what staff wanted to do and not what the parent wanted to do. As far as instruction is concerned, parents complained that they had no idea what the kids were doing in classes sometimes. That there seemed to be busy work. It didn't seem to be connected to standards or any part of curriculum. They just simply had no idea what they were doing and why they were doing it. Sometimes there were aides in classrooms that didn't seem to know what they were supposed to do. They seemed to be people there who were grading papers, or they didn't see any group kinds of activities. And they just simply, why do you have additional support people when they don't seem to be doing much? The other thing, as far as it relates to instruction, that there's a link between behavior sometimes and a disability. And if schools don't look at the IEP and understand it, then that link gets missed. And so students sometimes enter discipline and in situations where they shouldn't be. So they miss time, which further impedes their ability to learn as other kids in their classrooms. Instruction continued. Teacher, ensuring that the specialized instructional time outlined in the IEP is not only adhered to, but quantified. And let me give you an example. Let's say the aide in the classroom is going to work with your child, and it's laid out in the IEP at least 20 minutes a day. So the parent's thinking, okay, my kid is getting extra support at least 20 minutes a day. So the next meeting, the parent asks the question, did the aide adhere to what we indicated in the IEP, that my child was going to get 20 minutes a day? And everybody looks at each other, scratches their head. We don't know anything about that, but it's in the IEP. And so it's not quantified, which means there was no score kept to determine whether or not, in fact, the student was getting the service the IEP had laid out for him. Explaining to parents the student achievement impact of the IEP. Again, I talked about this before, but it's come up several times. Parents need to know if their child is getting an IEP for support and for service and assistance, then we need to know whether or not it's working. We need to have some kind, and I think Gio's going to talk about this later. There's got to be some kind of testing, some kind of monitoring that we can do to determine how well something is working. As far as discipline is related to many of the parent complaints, one is principals were making decisions, teachers were making decisions without consulting anyone, without consulting experts. And district has a lot of experts. And so we found that nobody knew why this decision was made. And then when you try to research it, the person making the decision didn't have probably should have been the one making that decision. And so things got confused and students didn't get the services that they really wanted. Again, this has come up again, and I'm going to talk about it again. The lack of communication on the interaction between their disability and discipline. A good example would be somebody who's has Tourette's maybe, and the student continually uses profane language or when they get frustrated. And that's laid out in the IEP. So the student uses that language and in the teacher's direction, and the teacher gets mad and sends the kid out. Well, what we would rather have in that situation is a level of communication of what happened and what's outlined in the IEP. And if that teacher would have understood what was in the IEP, then sending that kid out for discipline would definitely not have been the method used in that situation. The other thing we've noticed too is that when students need an alternative means of correction that moves beyond suspension, moves beyond isolation, schools and staff don't seem to have a large toolbox of ideas on how to use alternative means of correction. And that simply means we have to make sure that we not only improve the toolbox for our staff persons, but we have to expand to give them a number of options so that they can correct behavior in a way that does not impede a student's actual growth. So you can almost imagine getting all of these complaints from parents that now we have to ensure that something is done. As an organization, it's emotional. You're moving in, moving into an area that you've not ever touched before, but we just simply said to ourselves, we don't have a choice. We're here for our kids, our African-American children, and we're going to pull the trigger and we're going to get it done. And so we move forward. And the lawsuit is what we decided to do. And in filing that lawsuit and coming to a place where we can come to some level of agreement and initiate discussions towards that agreement, the district did three things that we thought were very important. The first thing the district did was to halt all suspensions based on willful defiance, even before it became state law for all K-8 students. And what that simply means, if you remember willful defiance could be anything that a staff person decided it to be if it was disruptive. So if I dropped a pencil and it made a loud noise, a teacher could actually make a decision to discipline me for that. And so willful defiance by state law was decided that for K-8 students, we would not use it because it just didn't have a meaning or a focus that really resonated with parents and the kinds of things that their kids were involved in school. And so for a short period of time, it's going to sunset in January of 24. And so organizations like mine are out again trying to make sure that we can not only extend it in K-8, but extend it all the way to throughout high school. They also reduced the number of days a student with a disability could be suspended before triggering a manifestation determination meeting. In other words, rather than putting a kid on the 10-day suspension, it triggered a manifestation meeting so that we can bring other experts to the table to determine if that disability was in fact the reason for triggering whatever behavior that occurred within the classroom. The third thing that they agreed to do was to make a direct call to administrators to kind of tell them not to call parents and ask them to come pick their children up. And what that simply does is it puts administrators in a position where now they don't have to complete any information about suspensions. So then those suspensions aren't logged. And if they're not logged, then we don't get very good data coming from that school. And as our organization believes very clearly that schools have to be above board, they have to be honest, and they have to be transparent. If you have 50, if you give out 50 suspensions, then we should know about that. Because then when we start working the following year on, we can work specifically on reducing that level of suspensions. But if 10 of them are suspensions and the other 40 are soft suspensions, meaning there's no paperwork done, then you only have to next year work on 10. And so then you're out of alignment with school improvement. And that's just not something our kids can wait on. So what did these interim changes aim to do? Promote a high level of accountability, shift the mindset to be totally and completely student-focused, and protect the rights for all, and especially for African-American kids in particular. Thanks, Gio. I think you're up.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. Well done, Mr. White. And so with what Mr. White shared and that frame of how we got to this place of a lawsuit and then some interim measures, or some short-term measures of agreement, the district and Black Pearl School Board used a significant amount of time between the initial filing of the lawsuit, I think was in the beginning of 2020, to 2023. Obviously, a worldwide pandemic played a significant role in slowing down some of those processes, as well as school closures, which limited the opportunity to really see how these interim measures really kind of went into place. But as students and the world kind of went back to normal, we started to see what this was looking like and sounding like and feeling like within our schools. And so as that took place, conversations between and negotiations between the Black Pearl School Board and Sacramento City Unified School District continue to move forward. And so this compromise agreement was reached. And what this does is provides the opportunity for the district to reverse its history of denying the rights of Black students and students with disabilities. It also promotes and protects the rights of students with disabilities to learn in educational environments with their non-disabled peers. And it ensures that an effective due process is in place for suspensions and expulsions. So what this compromise is going to do is provide a system for structured collaboration between the Black Pearl School Board and the Sacramento City Unified School District to address these areas specifically, and provides an opportunity for collaboration between both groups. It provides clear guidance and expectations around the areas of focus to address these systemic issues, and then provides a system of follow-up as needed to promote the continued success for all students. So this is where our independent monitor comes in. As an aspect of the agreement, an independent monitor has been chosen that does not work for the school district as an employee. They are an independent monitor. We contract with this person and their organization to oversee the development and implementation of an action plan. And so what that does is provides us an opportunity to have, as Mr. White shared, clear, consistent, and reliable data that leads to an honest accountability measure for us as a district. So it must be a third-party outsider. The settlement agreement establishes a specific process that both sides went through for selection of this independent monitor, and that this must provide an update on the independent monitor selection and role. At this time, we have selected an independent monitor. His name is Dr. Gregory Peters. He's out of San Francisco, and we are very hopeful. We're finalizing his contract literally as we speak, and are hoping to take it to our governing board, I believe tomorrow, in order to have it be finalized, in order for him to begin his work of doing an analysis of what our work has looked like thus far in the specific areas identified within the agreement. And then we'll be working with both sides to gain perspective and understanding in order to develop an action plan on what specifically we would be tackling sort of first, second, and so forth as the monitoring phase comes into place over the next number of years. Our independent monitor must meet certain agreed upon qualifications that include disability rights and anti-discrimination laws. This independent monitor, as I mentioned, creates an action plan that sets out the goals the district must achieve alongside a timeline. And so some of the things that are covered within the agreement include the substantial reduction in suspensions, including informal suspensions and expulsions, as Mr. White mentioned. That's a sort of soft suspension. A substantial reduction in the placement of students in segregated classrooms and schools. So this goes specifically to the area in special education. So look at what's known as the least restrictive environment, which is the providing of students with disabilities the most amount of access to typically developing peers as appropriate for their disability. We're also looking at a substantial reduction in the incidence and disproportionality in bullying and harassment. In increased transparency and meaningful participation of parents and students in the development of IEPs to attend other related meetings. This speaks to Mr. White's comments that in those listening circles, there were complaints and concerns regarding meetings being essentially completed, or that it had all been worked out, and that parents weren't provided much of an opportunity to have meaningful participation in the development of their students' IEP. Provide supportive training and coaching for teachers and other district staff consistent with the goals of the agreement. We know that this what at times may seem like a shift in mindset is going to come with opportunities for staff to question why this is going on, and to give opportunity in which we can engage staff to identify what are the best practices in the development of IEPs, and then have opportunity to collaborate and coach and train and work alongside our practitioners to evolve and implement new practices, reinforce existing positive practices across the district. So that's where what's covered in the agreement there. And so now we start to get into the idea of what can be in the independent monitor's action plan. So specifically coming out of the agreement, it states that within 60 days of the approval of the independent monitor's contract, this IM or independent monitor shall provide the parties in writing a proposed plan to respond and address a number of different things. And so you'll have to excuse me that the next number of slides will go into each one of the identified areas that are brought forth in the agreement that the action plan can address, and over time we'll address all of them. The what comes first versus second versus third piece will come from our independent monitor after consultation with both parties, as well as a review of current structures, current practices, policies, and procedures. But the specifics areas include a reduction in the disciplinary referrals, including informal suspensions and in disproportionate such discipline of students with disabilities. The substantial reduction in discipline referrals, including informal suspensions and in disproportionate of Black students with disabilities. The reduction in the placement of students with disabilities in segregated settings. The disproportionate placement of African-American students with disabilities in segregated settings. So you'll notice here that in the last 4 bullet points, it provides sort of a global look at segregated settings, but then also concentrates a subsequent bullet point specific to our Black students with disabilities. Next one is the substantial increase in the placement of students with disabilities, in particular Black students with disabilities, in inclusive and integrated classrooms, schools, and school settings in the least restrictive environment as measured by the percentage of time outside of general education setting. So it's a very technical sort of special ed language that speaks to the percentage of time students with disabilities spend outside of general education, receiving their sort of their services in a separate setting, removed from their typically developing peers. And so what this particular action speaks to is increasing the opportunity to provide those services and supports in a setting that is with typically developing peers. The next one is the substantial reduction in incidence and disproportionality in bullying and harassment of students with disabilities and Black students with disabilities, and staffing and structures, including delineated staff responsibilities and duties to support a functional and robust system that properly responds to, remediates, and prevents bullying and harassment of students with disabilities and Black students with disabilities. This is obviously a very in-depth action that speaks to what are the current practices in place when it comes to our bullying response, as well as our structures in identifying what bullying is. And then this asks the independent monitor to put particular importance into looking at this area and identifying, is this something that needs to be looked at a deeper level and needs to be addressed. The next one is compliance with what's known as child find obligations, including a manner in which appropriately identifies Black students with disabilities without over-identifying or under-identifying Black students for special education and particular disability categories. We are a district that is identified for something that's known as significant disproportionality for the identification of African-American students under the eligibility of emotional disturbance. So this is something that then looks specifically at what are sort of the triggers that are happening to look at how are we going from a student who may be struggling in class or in school, to looking at specifically an assessment in the area looking at emotional disturbance, as well as what are the structures that we have in place globally to appropriately identify students who we do believe, in fact, have a disability in place. In connecting this with what Mr. White shared at the beginning, this is where those that SST slide comes in, those pre-referral activities that speak to consistent interventions becomes really important, because we want to ensure that we have consistent interventions across our system in order that then we can better evaluate the implementation of those interventions in order to identify where we may need additional supports, where we have effective practices, and how are we utilizing those effective practices to identify the appropriate students that may in fact need assessments for an IEP. The next one is compliance with our obligation to refer students suspected of having a disability for special education assessment in a timely manner, which looks at how are we utilizing our SST structures to ensure that we are looking at the implementation of interventions prior to jumping to assessment, but also not letting that process, quote unquote, drag on too long before identifying that we may in fact have a disability in play here. The next one is a substantial reduction in the over-identification and under-identification of Black students for special education in general. And then as well as an analysis of our what's known as education-related mental health services, or ERMS, processes to promote adequate, effective, and timely and appropriate access of those mental health services to students. So that's going to look at how are we currently, what practices are we currently utilizing to identify whether or not a student has a need for and would benefit from education-related mental health services, and then looking at then what is that process looking like, and does that need to be relooked at? In a very similar fashion, looking at our process for what's known as a functional behavior assessment, or FBA, and the development of behavior intervention plans. And so this next one is kind of a big one, because it encompasses a lot of things, as you'll notice in sort of the language that's used, which is the development of best practices which are compliant with both state and federal laws to develop and conduct IEPs, their related processes. And this is where it kind of opens it up for a number of different things, where it says including but not limited to increased transparency, which obviously means parental involvement and parental knowledge, accessibility, including language access, involvement of parents, and where appropriate, equal participation with the districts in contacting methods to maximize parental participation, a decision-making process geared towards placement in the least restrictive environment possible, which again just kind of reiterates the focus that a lot of what tonight's discussion is around, is that we want to have our students, in particular our Black students with disabilities, educated with their typically developing peers as much as possible. And the inclusion of district staff knowledgeable about and with the authority to identify and allocate appropriate programs, services, supports, and placements for students with IEPs. So essentially, help build the knowledge base of our staff in order so that they can be the experts in the room and help guide conversations for the betterment of our IEPs and our students with disabilities. The next one is the substantial reduction in the overall use of and disproportionality in the use of restraints and seclusion for students with disabilities and Black students with disabilities. So this is looking at monitoring the prevalence of the use of our what's known as nonviolent crisis intervention to identify when in fact are we in fact utilizing those necessary holds and skills in order to keep students safe. And then the next one is the adequate and appropriate use of best practices regarding what is known as our SELPA procedural guide. So this is an area in our website that has a number of different chapters that kind of provide background and information around a number of different areas, like assessment processes, pre-referral processes, what is in IEE, an independent educational evaluation, what to expect when looking at discipline for students with disabilities, utilizing and reviewing that resource, making sure that it's accessible, that it makes sense, and that families know where to get it, how to utilize it, and when to ask questions around it, who those questions should go to, and such. The next one goes into looking at what does our ratio in the area of school psychologists look like, how many students per school psychologist to effectively look and support MTSS interventions and comprehensive school support services. The next one is the implementation of data-driven programs and systems to recruit and retain diverse teaching staff and school site administrators. So this is work with our human resources departments to ensure that we have systems and programs in place that help us recruit and retain diverse teaching staff for our students and our community. The next couple are, the first is the implementation of a professional development system designed to achieve the goals of the agreement based on students, teachers, and staff needs, the effectiveness of which is measurable, including the goals of establishing and maintaining substantial competency among staff regarding obligations under special education laws, consistent with best practices, and culturally responsive pedagogy for educating students with disabilities and Black students with disabilities in particular. So this is looking at how are we providing training, coaching, professional learning opportunities at the moment, and then asking our independent monitor to identify and help plan for how do we build a, if needed, a more robust system in that area, and what would that look like? The next one is the targeted outreach and recruitment focused on diversifying our workforce, specifically to reach measurable improvement in the hiring and retention of BIPOC employees and employees with disabilities in each of the following groups: teachers, classified staff, as well as service providers. And we then have the implementation of a mechanism for the independent monitor. Sorry, I have something in, there you go, in collaboration with the district, present at publicly agendized workshops in front of our board to provide an update to the district and community on our progress in implementing the provisions of the agreement and the outcomes that will be determined pursuant to the agreement to happen at least twice a year, starting at 6 months after commencement of the compliance period of the agreement, which has now essentially would start after then contract approval, I believe, tomorrow. Okay, and so then also looking at then an important part of this action plan is to obviously look at what do we currently have in place. This is a lot of this work we're already engaging in. Is it the most cohesive and coherent plan? I would say not, and that we have obviously opportunities to build more coherence and clarity around what the focus of our work is. But then we also need to have reliable data collection systems that then everyone is aware of, that this is the area, this is the data that we're going to look at for these particular metrics. And so one of the areas that the action plan developments will eventually look at and is the establishment of reliable data collection systems to track these methods. So we're always speaking apples to apples across the system. And then very important is mechanisms to gather and incorporate feedback from our community, from our students, our teachers, our classified staff, as well as parents in the development of not only the action plan, but the systems that come as a result of that action plan and the policies that would then be driving that action plan beyond the implementation phase. So that final action plan, after kind of reviewing all of that and the associated work that's kind of identified in each of those areas, our independent monitor would have 60 days to collaborate and reach an agreement on a final action plan. So with that, I think one of the things that then obviously this webinar kind of can elicit is questions around, like, how do I become more involved? Where can I read this agreement? What are some of the resources that exist out there? And if I have specific questions about my student or a situation or someone I know or a particular process or procedure, who can I get in contact with? And so when we post this webinar, some of these resources will be important because they have contacts in there. The first one is the press release and link to the compromise agreement, so you can read the entire agreement, and it's on our website. On our district website, there are also parent resources that are available. As I mentioned, in one of the measures is the SELPA procedural guide, so I put that in there as well. As we had obviously one of the areas of concern and areas that led to the suit was around timelines. And so we have this timelines resource that gives valuable information around what is the timeline for in regards to when I've requested assessment, what's the timeline for the district to respond, what is the timeline for different processes within special education. It's a very valuable and easy to read resource. There's a copy of procedural safeguards. I believe we have them in, I think, at least 15 different languages up on our website that you can utilize in order to know and understand your parent rights under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act for students with disabilities. And then we know that we are going to encounter conflicts. Obviously, we want to limit the opportunity, those situations, but we know that they are going to exist. And so this is a process that we utilize in special education, which is known as our alternative dispute resolution process, or ADR. And this provides an opportunity where families can reach out and say, you know what, I'm completely in disagreement with my IEP team. I feel as though I'm not being heard, and we have a number of kind of processes and supports that are available in order to help families receive support in those areas. We have an independent ADR facilitator that we will utilize, and you can email with directly to kind of be a sounding board to check in with. And then we also have a link to our special education acronyms and abbreviations, which is important because I live and breathe special education every day. And so this is all very, very familiar to me, but it is definitely an alphabet soup out there around a number of different things. So it is a very good resource to have. Unfortunately, this is a bit of an older slide. And so one thing that's not on here that is on the one that we'll post is a link to our Community Advisory Committee, or CAC. And this is a very important group in our district that serves students with disabilities in particular. As an organization, we meet once a month in a general meeting and discuss a number of different topics. We have topics around ADR, we have topics around dyslexia, we have topics around classroom practices, available resources. We have office hours before our CAC meetings, in which myself, as well as our other district administrators working in special education are available to meet with families individually to answer any questions that they have about their students and their students' IEPs. And then for now, I put down a couple of direct contacts. If you have any questions about this presentation, or if it triggered something for, like, hey, I have a question about my kid's IEP or a discipline thing that happened. And so we have contacts there for you. The first one is myself. I'm Giovanni Linares, and I serve as our SELPA director. And so the link will provide you to my email address. And then I've also put down William Tolstrup. He's our interim assistant superintendent of special education, innovation, and learning. And so he will also be available to answer any questions. And if we may not be available, we also have additional staff that we can utilize and provide support to you.
Hey, Gio, can I ask a clarifying question?
Yes, sir.
CAC meetings, did you mean to intend that parents could show up there and get actual service after the meeting?
Yes, sort of both, and it's we usually hold office hours the hour before, so that's usually our CAC meetings are the third Tuesday of every month, and so that would be and those go from very similar to this. They go from 6 to 8 p.m. Office hours are from 5 to 6. And that is a venue in which folks can come in and get specific questions answered. But any of those families are also welcome to attend the session itself if it's of a particular interest. Or there's also very much like a board meeting. There's like a public comment section where folks can make comments. And then I attend those meetings and would be available to provide my email address as well and follow up with families as needed.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Outside of that, I think one thing that we wanted to share is our next meeting is next week. This is our look at, there it is, it worked. Is our in-person town hall meeting, which would be next week on 9/26 at Hiram Johnson in the auditorium at 6 p.m. So with that, I think we will take any questions.
So I can read some of the questions that came in through the Q&A, and either one of you can answer those questions. The first one, which was the most common one, was, and Alex can fill in for me on some of the other questions because I know she responded to some. Can the slides be shared as a PDF, and will they be made available, and where can they get the slides, and when will they be available?
They could definitely be available. The only question that I have that I just have to work out internally is like, in how many different places are we going to share it? I'm happy to put it on the special education website and on the the SELPA website as well. But there, we may want to link it or also put it where we have the press release possibly, but I would need to talk to just other folks internally to just make sure that we have an idea of how many different places we want to upload the slides, but I'm happy to do it. And I should have them up sometime tomorrow, I would believe.
Tomorrow evening?
Yes, definitely by tomorrow evening.
Okay. So another question.
Well, Carl, let me clarify something, Carl, if I can. Did you want to also put this on our website as well?
Yeah, once I get a copy of it, it'll also be on the Black Pearl School Board website as well.
Okay, sounds good.
One question that came up, there's a couple of questions that speak specifically to the plan itself, but one was from Andrea. If the principal is not on board with special education, the school won't be either. I've been told by principals they have nothing to do with it. There appears to be no accountability. How would you address, how will the plan will be able to address that issue? Are all the principals going to be on board? Is it just for targeted to specific schools? It's schools that are.
Yeah, that's a great question, Mr. Pinkston. One of the plans that we have within our academic office is, as the development of the action plan is taking place and being finalized, is to provide updates to the entirety of our academic office, to our principals, to our academic office leadership team, to ensure and build connectivity between this work and the work that everyone is engaging in on a day-to-day basis, so that it isn't seen as like I'm not involved, or that that doesn't concern me, or or even the idea of another thing, but rather how it has connectivity to our day-to-day practices. And so we'll be updating our site and department leaders on the development of the action plan and providing opportunities in which there can be questions and answers around what is this going to look like for me? What does what does the implementation of an action plan look like for school A versus school B? There'll be an opportunity for site leaders to work with different leaders within the district to make sure that everyone is on board.
Can I add something to that, Gio?
Of course.
Okay. So I just want to say that we also want to recognize within the academic office that this plan is not just a special education plan. This is a general education plan because some of the issues and the concerns arise well before a student becomes identified as special education. And we know that site leadership is very critical and very important to the education of all students. So, and I also recognize that many parents and students, they don't know district level administrators that are in the district office who have support special education. But who parents and students do know are their site leadership and site principals. Therefore, it's really critical that principals take the lead to support special education students and families. And they do so in many important ways. They do that by gathering data about the students and observing the children in their classrooms regularly, by collecting information prior to IEP meetings or SST meetings, and reviewing really the section of the IDA that outlines the school's legal obligations for special education students, and knowing that when they go to those meetings and in support of those students and families. So it is everyone's responsibility to support students and families of special education students.
Another question that seems to be, and I'm combining a number of different questions, but they're all related to the question of how much training that will be provided for staff, teachers, principals, to be made aware of special education. There was one example, is there a principal guide to special education? What type of training? And will that be as part of the action plan, or?
We can't hear you, Gio.
Sorry. Again, another great question. It is definitely what I believe is going to be a major focus of our action plan with the independent monitor, is how are and what are the opportunities in which we can engage with the educators within our organization in professional learning. Regardless of whether it is teachers, classified staff, school psychologists, social workers, principals. What are those venues? What is the sort of the coherent focus that speak to, as our chief academic officer kind of shared, is that it is a collective responsibility in both general education and special education. So it isn't just focused on special education itself, but that our general education partners also have an opportunity to learn more about the pre-referral activities, the referral activities, as well as the special education processes, in order to ensure that we are actually building capacity and knowledge base in the areas identified in, as areas of importance in the suit, as well as what I would imagine in the action plan.
And then one other question, and then I'll turn it to Alex, because I see there's a lot of questions that are coming in, but I'm just trying to capture some. Will parents and community be able to share their experience with the independent monitor?
Yes, I believe I believe that there's an aspect of the agreement that speaks to community engagement for the development of the action plan and the monitoring of the action plan. So I do believe that is in place. The specifics around that, I don't know off the top of my head, and that may be something that hasn't been developed, because it would likely be a part of the action plan development and sort of the monitoring of that plan. But I do believe that that's an aspect of the intention of the work going forward.
Yeah, Jill, it definitely is.
Good.
That was what appealed to many of us about what the Peters organization, how they were going to lead the effort. So yes.
Correct. Good, thank you.
And there are a few questions about when the plan takes effect and how long the process will be and how long the monitoring will be.
Yeah, so the action plan development process begins essentially immediately after the contract is approved. And as I mentioned, I received an email earlier this evening that I think we're all set and we should be presenting to our governing board tomorrow on the contract. And if that in fact does take place, then 60 days from there is when the development of the final action plan needs to be finalized. And so essentially we may start thinking of 60 days from tomorrow in order to look at the final action plan. And then the monitoring phase, I believe, is 5 years of monitoring. And obviously just based off of everything that's identified and some of the metrics and the data collection systems, the goal is to build sort of a self-sustaining functional system that doesn't require that level of monitoring beyond what's identified in the agreement in order to continue that progress going forward.
And there are a few questions that brought up the issue of data and statistics. Is this plan just about gathering more data? People have expressed that there kind of already is data showing some of the issues.
No, I would share that obviously data is an important aspect to help monitor the implementation and the effectiveness of a plan, but it is not the intention to focus on the collection of data, but rather the impact that the action plan is having for the experience of our students in special education. So it is definitely something that we want to look at so that we are, kind of looking at it through a very similar lens when it comes to consistent and common data practices, but it is not meant to be a data collection process of itself.
There are also questions about how this will trickle down to specific schools, what specific schools be focused on in the monitoring.
That's a great question. It has not been something that I've kind of looked at in the idea of focusing on particular schools. The final action plan is going to come from our independent monitor, and he may have recommendations in that kind of potential based off of the information that he reviews, which includes, the Council of Great City Schools report, the Capital of Suspension, the SIR report that came out of the California Collaborative for Educational Excellence for our district. I think that's going to provide opportunities for our independent monitor to identify, is there a need to focus in a particular area, particular grades, particular schools? But at this point, it has not been something that as a department we have been looking at doing in our own work specifically.
Where can a parent go to get information on parent rights as it relates to special education and how they can best advocate for their child?
So a few different resources. We have our constituent services department within the district. I would also invite them to contact our CAC. They, as I mentioned, that is a group of very passionate families that are here to serve not only their own students, but for every student with a disability within the district. And I would say that, like, if you want to do that, like, that email is it's pretty simple. It's cac@scusd.edu. Our chair has access to that, email address and can provide a response. Once we get this posted, families are also feel free to reach out to myself or to our interim assistant superintendent. And then there are also resources on that resources slide that I shared that would also be able to provide to or kind of links to other organizations as well.
Is there on the Sac City Unified School District website a parent right or a parent guide?
Like a parent's concern, like a parent's handbook to special education.
Yes.
We are currently working
what the rights are.
Yeah, so there is the parent rights piece itself, but that's a very formal document. But we are working with our CAC to update and provide a parent handbook that we're hoping to get out to our community.
There's about how soft suspensions that may not have been documented, how will those be measured?
Well, I think just technically speaking, I don't think that's like we can measure them if they're not being inputted in anywhere. And so that was definitely one of the interim measures that went into the short-term and interim measures that went into place at the start of the lawsuit was to stop that practice. And so that in terms of monitoring that, we would obviously be expecting and promoting that we are not utilizing that practice. And so then we would, in fact, not be looking to monitor that. One thing that we would obviously look at is making sure that our administrators have a clear guidance on how to input and input into our system suspensions in order so that there is clarity around that and that there is sort of consistency across our district in that data collection process in order to make sure that we are capturing all of those situations.
There's a question about does this settlement agreement only concern African American students or only or special education students as a whole?
The agreement kind of encompasses both. It is for all students who have a disability or students receiving special education services. But then there are particular sort of areas of focus based off of our significant disproportionality identification, that focus on our African American students with disabilities in particular.
I noticed I don't know, Alex, but I noticed there was a number of questions that relate specifically to people's issues that are a little bit more very specifically focused. I just want to let people know that we will attempt to answer those questions or try to reach out to you to answer those questions that relate specifically to your particular area. And we're trying to frame the questions so it's a little bit more generic. So if we're not able to answer your question very specific, it's that relates specifically to your school or your child, please know that we're capturing those questions and hopefully be able to answer them more clearly and specifically for you in the future.
I also noticed a few questions about the IEP process and some frustrations with the IEP process. And I wanted to say that that is one of the areas that the independent monitor is going to be reviewing and will be part of the action plan, including like how parents can be effectively given the opportunity to participate in the best way in those IEP meetings.
You're on mute. Gio.
I'm sorry. Is there anything else? Mr. White, is there anything else you'd like to share? You're on mute, sir.
Yeah, okay. In reference to the last question or overall?
Oh, just overall.
Oh, no.
Okay. Unless there's anything else, I personally would like to thank everyone, especially if you came on early. You heard Mr. White and I kind of trying to figure out this whole webinar situation. I appreciate everyone's patience, everyone's willingness to go through that entire presentation, and to asking very, very thoughtful questions. Definitely excited to have the opportunity to work with our independent monitor over the next number of years, as well as the Black Parallel School Board. I feel like the veteran now in the special education department, but I wasn't here when the suit started. I came in about a year after it had been filed, but I'm definitely I see where the areas of concern are for a large urban districts, and with a number of different practices that I feel need to be highlighted for the good that they do. And I just hope that this is an opportunity that gives us, as a department, as a district, an opportunity to reflect, to see some of those positive practices, and also have the opportunity to have honest conversations around where we can be better, and work with our community in order to reach that area. So I'm appreciative for everyone's time.
I
do have something to say. Yes.
You know, it's going to come at some point. Yeah, I just want to be very clear. The Black Parallel School Board is not going away. I mean, we're still going to be involved in this, but we don't see ourselves being the middle person for individual issues that complainants might have. Our job is to make sure that this system is going to work for everybody. And so we want to get a good sense that you're getting answers to your questions, you're getting your issues resolved within the system that we're all embarking on. I mean, this is all about change. This is revolution. We're bringing specific change to this district so that it works for every child who has an IEP, those who may have an IEP, and for parents who have kids that need support. And so we want to make sure that you understand, we're going to make sure that those systems continue to work for you. But we want to encourage the district, and they've shown very clearly that they're willing to step up, and that those issues that you have get resolved. And so we don't intend to get hundreds of phone calls from you. If we tend to get 100 phone calls from you, that tells us it's not working to the extent that it should. And so I can assure you, we're going to both work together to ensure the Black Parallel School Board doesn't get 100 phone calls next week.
I agree completely. Okay. Thank you all very, very much. And I hope you have a wonderful evening.